Thank you so much. Welcome to this concurrent session. We are going to be focusing on critical illness, and the title is The Ticking Time Bomb of Complexity, the Evolving Landscape of Critical Illness and Its Unintended Consequences. And Nicholas Harrison will be taking us through that. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. It's lovely to be here to present on behalf of my colleague Yashna Famark, who really is the brains behind today's presentation on critical illness. Critical illness policies, of course, were pioneered here in South Africa in the 1980s. But since then, they've become a lot more complicated. So in a nutshell, the product's now pretty difficult to model. It typically has some risky product features. And to be honest, we've seen a fair amount of deteriorating experience. So the main objective of today's presentation is to go through how this product has evolved over time and what risks are posed by this evolution. To do that, we need to cover four things. First, an overview of how the product has evolved over time, and then we'll get to the two main talking points. One, that the way the product has evolved has increased the complexity of the modeling and the onerousness of the data requirements. And two, that in addition to those challenges, the product has also evolved to have some pretty risky product features. And then finally, we'll also give our view on some interventions which could improve the sustainability of the product. So first things first. When the product was first introduced, the idea was to provide cover for the financial implications of surviving a severe life-threatening illness. And at the time, the product was a little more focused than it is today and a lot simpler, only covering the four sort of main conditions: heart attack, stroke, cancer, coronary artery bypass graft. And I think certainly at that time the focus was on this surviving a life-altering illness piece. Of course, over time, the product was developed, and we got all sorts of new features, things like severity-based payouts, and then on the opposite, the flip side of that coin, things like top-up or upgrade covers. Multi-pay structures were also introduced. There were no waiting periods, and survival periods in more recent history have been removed as well. While this was all going on, the list of conditions continued to expand as well. And we're now at the point where there are over 500 severity-based conditions in the market. And there's a question there about how many of those are actually financially burdensome or life-altering. The end result of this is an increase in complexity, an increase in ambiguity in the T's and C's, and as a result, an increase in the risk. So to get to kind of the heart of what we mean by an increase in the risk, consider modeling just the first claim on a modern-day multi-pay CI. If you have 500 conditions, you ideally need incidence rates for all 500 conditions for every combination of your rating factors: age, gender, smoker status, SEC. But therein quite obviously lies the problem, right? Is that insured data for all these conditions at that level of granularity is scarce, to say the least. In addition to that, South African medical studies are often outdated or maybe not even there. And the insurance data that we see is very often not fit for purpose. And there are two examples of that. One might be not capturing claim causes granularly enough, so just saying cardiovascular instead of actually saying what the claim cause is. And the second one is that with the advent of top-up covers, where a 25% payout can be upgraded to 100%, it would be recorded as 100% in the claims data. Then it's very difficult to unpick which are genuine 100% severity claims and which ones are 25% claims which have now been upgraded to 100%. So that makes it a little bit more difficult. And the overall message here is that the way that the product has evolved has increased the onerousness of the data requirements, but the data itself is in short supply. Now you might say, okay, well, there are a couple of conditions, cancer, stroke, which make up the bulk of the claim, so why don't we just focus on those? We'll do those ones properly, and then we'll do something sensible for the rest. But there are two problems with this. The first is that our analysis shows that that mix of claims is changing over time. So other cardiovascular causes and neurological causes are making up a bigger share of claims over time. So almost to state this another way, the problem with the argument is that it's relying on the mix of claims today. It's not necessarily the mix of claims in future. The second problem is that a big category like cancer is itself an umbrella term for a group of different diseases. So once you kind of dig into it, it doesn't really provide that much simplification anyway. So setting the incidence rates just for your first claim is really challenging. But of course, in a multi-pay structure, you can have more than one claim. As the portfolio matures, more and more people might have had their first claim. So then the question is, okay, what does that do to your probability of having a second claim or a third claim? If you claim for condition A already, how does that impact your probability of claiming for condition B or condition C? You know, on the other hand, now you're sick, you need the cover, so what does that do to your lapse probability? Or now you're sick, what does that do to your probability of exiting from impaired mortality? So as a portfolio matures and as time goes on, there's all sorts of other transition probabilities that need to be estimated that become a lot more important as time goes on. And a lot of those probabilities are probably based on an uncertain starting point in the first place. So as time goes on, portfolio matures, and this uncertainty just compounds. So this kind of leads us to the question of saying, can we reliably estimate the probability and the cost of loss for these CI products? And it's not something which is like an academic question or technical exercise. It's something that has actual real-world financial implications, because these assumptions underlie the pricing basis on which you accept new business. They underlie the valuations basis on which you base the numbers that go into the financials. So it has a real-world impact. And we can kind of restate this in terms of the principles of insurability and ask, is this risk truly measurable? That's something at the heart of whether a risk is insurable, is whether we can truly measure the risk. So I just want to pause here for a moment, because this is kind of the first big talking point, is that the way the product has evolved makes modeling complicated, makes data requirements onerous, but the data itself is in short supply. However, in addition to this, the product has also evolved to have a number of risky product features. For example, there are no waiting periods. Now, it seems a bit unusual to talk about a waiting period in terms of a fully underwritten product. But this is actually a South African thing. In other markets in the world, their CI products do have waiting periods. So Canada is an example. And what a waiting period does is it prevents a knowledgeable individual like a doctor or a broker from combing through the product and finding a way to anti-select. It also stops even an ordinary policyholder who maybe knows they have something and kind of manages to get through the underwriting process, because the products are really complicated anyway. So is it reasonable to expect underwriters would pick up everything? So if you can get through the underwriting process, there's no waiting period, you can put through a reasonably early claim anyway. We also offer reasonably long rate guarantees, so 5 to 10 years, which is different to other health products in the market. So your medical aid contribution goes up every year. The T's and C's can kind of be tweaked every year. Gap cover is the same. But for CI, everything is in black and white, and we give a 5 to 10 year rate guarantee. Top-up covers as well increase the chance of windfall payments, which provides an incentive for anti-selection. This one I think is quite interesting, because in other types of insurance products, we actively avoid this situation. So in disability income, your replacement ratio is probably capped below 100%, so that there's an incentive to return to work, etc. On mortality, if you want a big cover, you'll be financially underwritten to make sure that that cover is justified. But on the top-up covers, the windfall payments are kind of allowed. There are also examples of weak definitions or outdated definitions. So one that's often given here is an Alzheimer's definition based on diagnosis alone. Now, with medical advances, you might be able to get a reasonably early Alzheimer's diagnosis just with blood tests. That means you can get a payout before any real need actually exists. And a real need might never exist depending on what happens to you between the day of the blood test and the day that it would have manifested. Linked to that, the multi-pay structures often have an exclusion that you can't claim for related claims. but then the T's and C's might not be so clear about what is related. It's not as though claims are bucketed and say these ones are all related, these ones are all related. So if you claim in this bucket, that's it for the rest of them. It's kind of a bit more loose in a lot of cases. The conditions covered are rapidly expanding, which again provides or compounds on all the data issues that we've spoken about before. And whole of life cover is becoming more common in the market. Now, earlier we spoke about the difficulties with estimating all these different probabilities and so on. That's true even at the core ages, where you have most of your exposure and most of your claims. At advanced ages, that problem is even more pronounced. I mean, even for more kind of a vanilla product like mortality, estimating rates at advanced ages can be quite challenging. So for CI, it's even more pronounced. And finally, from a long-term insurance perspective, where your T's and C's are kind of there in black and white at the outset, it's really difficult for those T's and C's to keep up with changes in the medical world. So just to pause here again, this is now the second big point, is that in addition to the challenges with the data and the modeling, the product has also evolved to have a number of these risky product features. And now the third piece of information is that we've seen a fair amount of deteriorating experience. So if the experience continues to deteriorate, which we predict that it will, and the product features can't be changed, then the only lever left to pull is price. But price is kind of a blunt tool, right? Because first of all, you can't price for anti-selection, but secondly, increasing prices limit your ability to service the need in a broad customer base because of affordability. And that then threatens the sustainability of the product in the first place. So, what can we do? There we go. What can we do? Rationalizing the list of conditions would be nice. But I think we need to be sober to the reality that we're kind of quite far down that path, and it may take a lot of time, it may not be so easy to walk that back. But we could look at some of the product features. So in order to make the product more sustainable, we could look at introducing waiting periods. As we mentioned, the waiting periods help against the anti-selection, and this could either be at policy inception or between related claims to reduce the chance of windfalls. We could also look at future-proofing definitions, so that would be, instead of basing everything on diagnosis alone, you have an underpin for some kind of functional impairment, right? So that yes, diagnosis is one piece, but you also have to have some life-altering component to it, so that there's a genuine need. Removing the top-up or the upgrade features would also reduce the chance of windfall payments and remove that incentive for anti-selection, and almost ensure that the benefit payouts match the need, the underlying need, a little bit more closely. Guarantee periods could also be shortened. I guess in a long-term insurance setting, there's always caveats about difficulties with re-rating an existing book and market pressures and all that kind of thing, but what it would do is it would at least give the insurer the option to react a little bit more quickly to changes. Something else that we think is really, really important is investing in the data collection. So despite the comments about the data being scarce, we think that it's worth investing in the data that we do have. So making sure we collect it in a granular way, making sure we take care of it, and making sure that it's ready for experience analysis, re-rating at the time that we need it. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes these exclusions for related claims are not so clear. So one thing we could do is bucket related claims and say clearly at the outset of the policy, this is what a related claim means. That would help the insurer, okay, but it would also help the policyholder from a claim certainty perspective, so that they kind of know upfront what to expect. Now, of course, changing these product features doesn't create more data, it doesn't change the data sparsity problem. But what it does do is it helps to remove some of the uncertainty that's been built on top of an already uncertain starting point. And as we mentioned, if the product features can't be adjusted and experience continues to deteriorate, then the only lever left to pull is price, and that threatens the sustainability of the product. So, overall, we think we should be asking these questions. Is CI still serving its original intent, which is to cover the financial implications of surviving a severe illness? Or are we kind of just paying out for an ever-growing list of diagnoses? And if we are those diagnoses financially burdensome? And is there an insurable interest? Or are we kind of covering events that don't really meet this definition of financial need? So our call to action is to revisit product design, to strengthen definitions, and to ensure that benefit payouts closely match the underlying need. And in doing so, ensure that CI can sustainably service the need in a broad population and continue to provide cover to those who need it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Super insightful every time. I'm upset about waiting periods included in the terms and conditions. You're going to add more. So let's take questions from the floor. By show of hands, if there are questions, we can then take those. There are roving mics going around the room. Was that a hand or a head pat? Head pat, sorry. So does that mean abundantly clear? Oh, there's a hand in front. There we go. And a second one there. So there's a lady in white over there, and we can kick off with the gentleman who's already got a microphone.
Hi, Mark Lee, I'll what would your response be or advice then to your clients around the fact that, the reason why insurers are doing this is because it's seen as the way to compete. We offer the most comprehensive benefit that covers everything, so you're less uncertain about, the events of claim. And that's ultimately what's driving this expansion to an insurable interest that no longer actually focuses on the need.
Yeah. I kind of thought this might come up about, it's almost part of a broader thing, like there's competitive pressures. So, and this is, as you say, what's driving everything down this road. But I think there are probably 2 points. One is, I doubt insurers would want to write loss-making business. And if you were to change your view on something and realize that you needed to charge a lot more or change the product features, then by implication, you should be willing to let your competitors write all of that and find out later. Now, that's not very helpful from a commercial perspective. It's like a very technical, actuarial answer. The other side of that, also kind of an actuarial thing, is that the competitive pressure is one side, but once the policies are on the books, we have to do our best to try and value those policies accurately. So you might actually get the pressure more on the valuation side if your head of actuarial function turns around and says, I don't know about this, we need to add a little bit here, add a little bit there, and suddenly the pressure is coming on the books, and then insurers might say, well, actually, we don't want to write this, there's too much of a strain, we need to do something else. And in that case, the competitive pressures kind of are less relevant because you're saying, well, I don't really want to write this in this way. And I think that happens in a lot of markets all the time. People exit product lines, or they change things, or they make decisions that they only do a certain type of thing. Really, it will come down to that tipping point of when people decide that maybe they're not so confident in the value of the policies. Where that tipping point is to be debated. My personal view is that generally in the market, people underestimate the complexity of modeling these products and the data requirements, and that there's a lot more, or like a lot wider uncertainty band around our best estimates than is given credit for.
Thank you. I think there's a question over there, if you've got microphone.
Thanks, Bryce, head chair of the CSI committee, for this question. So thanks so much, Nick. I think that was a really interesting presentation. A lot of golden nuggets in there that I think can be debated much further. But I guess maybe just a plea to the audience in terms of the data component. So CI is one of the products that we look into from a CSI perspective. And we're really keen to get an industry study produced to exactly help us understand as an industry some of these issues that we're dealing with, especially from a claim and a data perspective. But unfortunately, we have been struggling with contributors, with getting feedback. So yeah, I think it really speaks to this issue and the topics, and I really plead to you to be involved and submit your data so that we can make an industry study that really is relevant and helps unpack this further. Thank you.
And just to add to what Bryce is saying, the points that we made about the data being fit for purpose are quite apparent in the CSI efforts. So those problems that I mentioned about being able to pick out what severity a claim is, what the actual cause is, all of these things are very apparent once you start looking throughout the industry. And I think that's kind of underpinning the point that I was making earlier, that my personal opinion is that this issue is kind of underestimated in a lot of places, as there might be other focus areas and so on. But we think it's critical to make sure that the data collection and making that data useful for future is really, really important.
Awesome, Nicholas. I think there is a gentleman with a microphone on this side. Okay. If not, then there's two hands on that side. If we can take both those questions, would be great.
Hi, Nick. Thank you for the presentation. Obviously, I appreciate your presentations a lot more around the back-end modelling and data side. But off the first question, I was also sort of thinking about it from a competition space. You sort of got to be that bold insurer to take the step forward and leave your competitors. But any thoughts on how this might differ from a group versus individual product? Because, I think from a group side, a lot of the complexity is sort of removed from the actual benefit receiver because the decisions are being made elsewhere, and the intentions around price and how employers structure their employee benefits might be quite different.
Yeah, 100%. So you're 100% right that if you move from a long-term insurance setting to group setting, then some of these problems go away because you can re-rate every year and you can change your T's and C's every year, right? Because it's just an annual thing. Maybe there's some question about whether or not a market participant would want to be seen as that person who's chopping and changing every year. But I think you can get away with an amount of that. So I think that is one option. The trouble is that, to my knowledge, CI doesn't really sell that well in the group space. Potentially because of cost, but as you say, also depending on what the employer's particular opinions are or needs and so on. So I think it's interesting because this type of CI might actually find a better home in group life insurance than in retail. But the way that it's set up now is that actually it sells much more in retail than in group. Yeah.
I think there was another question that side with the microphone. Go for it.
Yeah, morning.
Morning.
So obviously in terms of new business going forward, one can simplify your product, change definitions and so forth, but But in terms of your existing business where you're bound by contract, you've already got the complexity embedded in your product. Do you have any suggestions on what one can do to manage your in-force book a little better? Obviously limited by sticking to what you've promised.
Yes. So I think that's one of the main difficulties with this in the context of a long-term insurance product, right? And that's kind of what we're mentioning now with the group comment and also about how it differs to other health products, medical aid and gap cover. You can chop and change things as you go. Now that it's in black and white in a long-term insurance product, as you say, you've got to keep your promises now. But what you could do is focus on the data collection part. So make sure that the data that you do have is actually fit for purpose and you can use and try and understand what's going on, and make sure that you can react quickly to things that are going on. Unfortunately, what we see a lot is the data is not really good enough to even know really what's going on. I mean, you can tell claims are bad, but you know, more than that, it's kind of like more educated guesses. So I would say that is, for me, is the starting point. Is if you know, or if you think something is not, it's uncertain, the first port of call is the data and the monitoring. Then I'll also do a cheeky self-plug and say contribute to the CSI study so that we can do an industry study and then hopefully share some more market-wide insights with a little bit more credibility. But yeah, I agree with you 100%. It is complicated, or it is difficult. If you've sold the policies already, it's there in black and white. You have to keep your promises. The only thing you can do is try and monitor and react as best you can.
All good. Just checking if there's any more questions. There's one on that side of the room. In the meantime, Nicholas, I do have a question. Did you plant that other comment/question in the audience for the CSI data plug? I see you guys.
Yeah, I'm not able to answer that question at this time.
I thought so. Plead the fifth. All good. Go for it, sir.
Thanks. A very important topic, I think, for the industry. I don't want to sort of labor onto the first question that was asked, but I think it is important to discuss. I don't know if any insurer is, and we spoke about being a brave insurer, like would a single insurer be brave enough to be the first mover to start offering a less comprehensive or more restrictive benefit, or do you think it's sort of ASSA's responsibility to make a decision as an industry to move forward in a certain way? And maybe to the previous question around in-force versus new policies, I mean, how do you think we can treat fairness between cohorts of policyholders if I take out a policy today and have big windfall benefits and, someone takes out a policy tomorrow and it's quite a bit more restrictive?
So there's kind of three things there, right? One is first mover, one is fairness between cohorts, and then the third one is what's the third part again? ASSA, right, yeah. Okay, so maybe start with that one. I don't really want to be controversial, but in theory, if ASSA were to change the guidance notes about CI to make, and the implication was that reserving became more strenuous, that would drive a change, right? I'm not suggesting they do that, please, before anyone quotes me. But that is a thing that could happen. In terms of the first mover, I don't know whether being a first mover is necessarily a bad thing, right? So you could come up with a different CI product, and if you really believe that that's better, it's better risk management and so on, you could potentially charge a lower price. You could have a different value proposition and maybe capture a different market share. The problem with CI at the moment is it's really expensive and it's really complicated. That might mean that there's a segment of the market that actually demands something more down to earth and a little bit more affordable. So, it's not to say that being the first mover is always a negative thing. You could turn it into something positive. And then the last piece is on, sorry.
Just fairness between...
Oh, fairness, yes. What really screws with fairness is the insurer going bankrupt. But obviously I'm exaggerating, right? I'm exaggerating because I'm not suggesting that CI is about to bankrupt everyone. But what I mean by that is that it's fairness between policyholders or the cohorts exist about making sure that some people, as you said, some people can get windfalls, some people can't. But if something is not working and it's going to cause losses or be strenuous for the insurer to write, that's also not fair because it does prejudice the insurer's financial strength and potentially the guarantee of future benefits. So someone might have bought a benefit thinking, this company's got a great financial rating. Then if they sell more and more, I'm just talking in general now, more and more strenuous policies, suddenly that financial strength reduces a little bit and then, it changes the situation. As I say, I'm not by any means saying that everyone's about to go bankrupt. I'm just saying that the fairness between cohorts needs to be balanced also with the ability of the company to meet those needs going forward. And if you believe that the CI products need to be kind of rationalized, then you also have to believe that the insurance company might have some doubts about how to meet all of these obligations in future.
Just checking for any last question. Looks like we're good. So Nicholas, sorry, there is one. Right there at the back, just behind you.
I think next time I'm going to make sure I present for longer. So
if you presented longer, we would have missed out on all the incredible nuggets from this Q&A.
It's terrible being up there getting the questions. Just a comment actually on
yes
that you're welcome to respond to afterwards with great insight. I appreciate actually a lot of what you're suggesting in this are things that we can do just to do our jobs better recording of data, being more clear about policy wording, thinking ahead about how things might evolve in our policy wording, etc. The perspective I'd want to just land a little bit more and bringing the pendulum back is that we shouldn't not do things because they are hard or ambiguous. The core question is, are we designing things that are good for customers? Something like a waiting period, the response of a potential customer to a waiting period is negative because they're awful. And so if you can design to avoid something that's bad for a customer and put in reasonable constraints elsewhere, it's a good thing to do. The same thing is with extending the list of critical illness benefits. And it does become a long list because bodies are weird. Crazy things happen to people. I haven't seen any evidence that those things being added are frivolous. They're just unusual or, unlikely. So I think those are actually good evolutions, or they could be. So just my encouragement is to think about, is it really good for the customer? What is actually good? Or is this just a windfall thing and we're becoming gambling? You want to get away from that. But if it's good, we shouldn't be put off that it's hard to do or to model.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's kind of the main thing, right, is that it's not to say you shouldn't do it, and it's not to say that everyone is wrong and something like that. It's just that the uncertainty should be recognized, and the complexity should be recognized and dealt with appropriately. So whereas the signals that you kind of get from the market are that it's not necessarily being dealt with the care it should be, given the level of uncertainty. As you say, doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, doesn't mean we shouldn't be a brave insurer. It just means that you need to deal with that appropriately and ask the question, does the pricing reflect that? Do our monitoring processes reflect that? And does our reserving reflect that uncertainty as well?
Awesome. With that, I'm going to free Nicholas. Okay, no last minute hands. So Nicholas, thank you so much, and also thanks to Yashna in absentia. I thought that this was really insightful. If you guys will just bear with us for a minute, there's a couple of housekeeping things to share with you. You've probably seen on the app that there's been a number of updates. There's been a slight shift in the program from the timing of the presidential address. The good news is you have a longer break and you have a longer lunch today. So let's get through that quickly. So we're heading into refreshment break now, which will effectively run till 10:20. So obviously you've got the app available to you where you can access speaker profiles, papers, presentations, and the program. The refreshment break is brought to you by IACA Consulting Actuaries. Please say hi to them in the exhibition hall. And then for the chess enthusiasts, please remember that right now during the break, the top 2 players, including some of the brightest upcoming actuarial minds, will be going head-to-head for the title of 2025 Insight Chess Champion. What are they going up for? The winner is getting 10,000 Rand. The runner-up is getting 5,000 Rand. But most importantly, there is a corporate team trophy for overall team performance and pure bragging rights until next year. There's also the fact that in the spirit of foresight and social impact, Insights is matching the winner's prize money of 10,000 Rand donation, and they're donating to Moves for Life, which focuses on empowering young South Africans to learn maths, science, and problem-solving skills through chess. So that is one to watch during the break. And then lastly, if you've ever wondered who answers when organizations call for actuarial consulting, please find out during this refreshment break that's brought to you by IACA Consulting Actuaries, who are ready and waiting to answer your questions in the exhibition hall. Please enjoy your tea break. Please note that at 10:20, we will kick off in plenary 3 for the President's address, and just take note of the updates that have happened on your app for the program. Awesome. Thank you very much for joining us in this session, and enjoy the break.